Thank you very much. Numbers don't lie, do they? No, they're saying that it doesn't work right there. Get this started. How about no? No's and dope. Do you know how to use this?
Yeah.
Great. Our last speaker for today is Dr. Joseph Clark. Dr. Clark has lectured in mathematical and financial economics and is currently Director of Commodity and Currency Strategy at Suncorp Investments, an Australian funds manager. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joseph Clark.
I'm the only one with a presentation, but it's not a PowerPoint. We only just got PowerPoint in Australia, and nobody's figured out how to use it yet, so it's going to be a PDF.
It's not bad.
Now, I actually haven't figured out how to use PDFs either. There's a way to make them. Maybe that. Climate change is a very, very divisive issue. There are many opinions from the extreme alarmist side to extreme skeptics, some of which have founded this conference. It can get extremely heated. Accusations of scientific fraud have become a mainstay on both sides, and a new epithet, denialist and sometimes delusionist, has been coined to describe people who think the problem is small. For someone in the financial markets, such as myself, this is all very strange. These disputes are ultimately over matters which will, in the passage of time, be solved conclusively, just as will the value of the S&P tomorrow, or the value of oil, or the Dow Jones. If I have a dispute with someone on something which will happen in the future in a financial market, I don't yell at them or call them names. I ask them what their position is, and possibly if they want to enter into some kind of a mutually beneficial trade, if they want to bet on their belief. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about climate markets today. So by climate markets, I mean markets that would allow people, just as they trade, just as markets are traded, financial markets are traded now, for people to trade their expectations of the effects of climate change, of temperature, of sea level, of the frequency and intensity of hurricanes, of sea level pH, and there's a raft of other things which are tangible predictions of climate science which are under dispute and which could be traded in exactly the same way that they trade other contracts. And to make this slightly more explicit, I'll give a little example. This table is a linear interpolation of the average IPCC estimates of sea level increase. And this, let's say that this is a market, and those numbers in millimeters are actually prices. Now, the market predicts, or the current market predicts, that by 2040 there will be 115 millimeters of sea level increase on average. Now, let's say I buy that contract. I buy that contract for $1 million notional value. That means that every millimeter in excess of 115.5 by 2040, I get $1 million for. And every millimeter less than 115.5, I lose $1 million. So it's a very simple bet on a tangible outcome which will be determined at some point in the future. I actually made an arithmetic mistake in my example, for which I can only excuse that I'm a statistician and not a mathematician. So it's an approximate answer. If, let's say that we're buying 2040 sea level rises, and it turns out that there's actually 20 centimetres of sea level increase, which is possible, and when we bought that contract, then we'll get 200 millimetres minus 115.5 times a million, so we'll get $84.5 million on the contract. And obviously we could have a larger, if we wanted to have a larger exposure, we could. If we wanted to have a smaller exposure, but the payoff will be just proportional to the difference between the market predicted rate. Now obviously that price will change. Someone might offer 115.4 or 115.6, and the trade would be the market expectation of what the market thinks is going to happen. Got one for temperature swaps, which is much the same. And there's a couple of slightly more complicated derivatives which can be made, which would be very useful, but it probably won't serve much of a purpose for us to go into those. This market, like all markets, would consist of, I should say, it actually does exist to a small extent, but I'll get back to that at the end. It will consist of speculators who look at the market price and say, I think that market price is wrong. And there are no shortage of these people when it comes to things like sea levels and temperature changes and all the predictions of global warming. Climate modelers themselves would probably certainly be outraged if they saw market prices for their predictions, and they could go in there and trade. Opinion writers on both sides, bloggers, economists, most people I've met who have some kind of a very strong opinion on climate change, unlike me. But much more importantly, there are a class of people who would benefit very substantially from these prediction markets, and these are people who have something to lose if there is significant climate change. There are many people who, if the sea level rises or if there's substantial temperature increase, stand to lose a lot of money. And these people would benefit if they believe that this might happen or there's a possibility. They would be able to go into these markets and protect themselves and in effect take out an insurance policy against global warming or the effects of global warming hurting them. Also, on the other side, there are quite a lot of people who stand to benefit from global warming. There's a lot of very, very cold countries in the world and a lot of very inhospitable land. If there's substantial temperature increases, then these countries, these land masses, will become a lot more livable and hence have a much higher value. Now, it's conceivable that the people who own land there would be prepared to enter into the opposite trade with somebody who stands to lose. And they would enter into a mutually beneficial trade where they agree to swap money in the case of global warming, just as one person's land becomes worth less and one person's land becomes worth more. There's also a final group, which I didn't fit on the slide, of insurance companies. Now, there is if people are really scared about global warming, then just as they're scared about their car being broken into or their house setting on fire, they will be prepared to pay a slightly unfair price to the insurance companies. So financial companies will potentially be induced to enter into these markets. And them being there is actually a really good thing, which I'll get to in a second. But that's what I see the market consisting of. Now, the global warming problem, or my sort of version of the global warming problem, has two parts. There's an information problem, which is what will happen and with what likelihoods, and that's the realm of the IPCC and indeed this conference for people to discuss and try to puzzle out the science and puzzle out the facts. Then there's the risk problem. Given that we have some view of what might happen, then we're going to have some kind of risk. How can that risk best be controlled? And to the extent that it can't be controlled, how can it best be allocated? Now, these are the main problems of global warming science, to my mind. Climate markets emphatically provide an answer to the information problem, because every possible, in a large enough market, every possible effect of climate change will be priced to some extent. And instead of having to go through peer-reviewed literature, or we still would do that as well, we will be able to just read off from the newspapers what the markets think sea level will be in 2040. I think that's of immense value. The risk problem part B, how can it best be allocated? Emphatically, it answers that. Because if there's somebody who's extremely worried that they live on the sea and they've been reading global warming websites and they're worried that their house is going to go under, then they can enter into an arrangement where if that does happen, then they'll be compensated to some extent. Yeah, and obviously also with the arrangements with insurance companies who are less risk averse than the more risk averse people. But also, and this is a more subtle point, it provides an answer to the risk control problem, the problem which governments are trying to solve. If we have large financial concerns, insurance companies and the like, who have made this substantial kind of insurance policy for global warming for all these people, these companies will have a substantial incentive if they have access to some technology which might mitigate climate change if it happens. And again, I don't take a view on that. But if they do they have a very direct financial incentive to employ mitigation technologies if they can. And they actually have a much, much better incentive than government, even from a pro-global warming perspective. Insurance companies who hold that risk, they have an excellent financial incentive to monitor that risk and to control it. So, insurance, climate change, from a political level, has been sold as an insurance problem. We're told that a bad event may happen in the future, this climate change. There's all sorts of events associated with that, and they'll all be very bad. And if we pay a small premium now in the form of taxes or cap and trade or investing in renewable technologies or funding climate scientists or all these raft of policies which have now been developed, then we will be able to prevent the excesses of that. So just like taking out insurance on your car. And that makes sense to a lot of people. And it's a very, very powerful argument, political argument for the global warming side, because even people who don't see the science as settled will say, yeah, well, I mean, look, we don't know, but just in case, we only have to pay this small amount now, and our minds will be set at rest. Very, very powerful political argument. But I think there's an equally powerful counter-argument. Perhaps there should be insurance, but it's not at all clear that the government is in the best position to provide that insurance for a number of reasons. If the government buys insurance on behalf of its country, or a multi-country agreement provides this insurance in some way, then every person gets the average level of insurance. And obviously that's not optimal. I mean, different individuals have different exposures to climate change. Some people have houses on the sea, some people have them in Iceland, some people have them in the desert. Not everybody, even under extreme sort of scenarios, not everybody stands to be impacted in the same way. And possibly even more importantly, different individuals have different risk and time preferences, which would all determine a different level of optimal insurance against these events. And so in that sense, I think it's a very powerful argument and a powerful rejoinder to this insurance argument which is provided. It's like, well, maybe we do need insurance, but I'm going to go get an insurance policy myself, a very small one or a very large one, and you can do what you like. There's no need for government to intermediate. So I'll just sort of summarize the arguments here. I think the bottom line of what I wanted to say, I know it's been very, very kind of general, is that whatever you believe about climate change and climate science, climate markets make sense. well, obviously they provide information. You're able to point at them and say, this is what the market believes, and if some extreme alarmist is talking up that there's going to be 20 metres of sea level rise, you say, well, how much money have you invested in a liquid financial market over there, which could make you a rich man if you're true? And if they say nothing, then you say, I don't think you were very sure. And I think that's a nice part for both sides to be able to hold each other to account. They obviously provide a way. People are scared. Some people are very scared. And to provide them with a way to hedge themselves, even if the risk is non-existent, it will provide a lot of psychic utility to people. There's also this issue of insurance companies taking on large amounts of climate risk, and then, if it is possible, and I don't know, for them to do something very clever and mitigate climate change, then they will have a very strong financial incentive to do that, and an incentive which is better than government. So I think that this is a very clear no regrets policy. It can coexist peacefully with any policy you have on climate change, or any policy you have on not doing anything about climate change. It just makes sense. So I think it is a winner, and I think we should do it. Thank you very much.